a praise to the Virgin Mary.
So we don't have trouble on our way.
Oh yeah, I felt like he was singing auto-tune all the time in that part.
He was singing what?
Auto-tune.
It might have been using a different scale, or
Because it sounds like, I don't know, because the instrument is doing the same.
yeah, it's a
but
heterophonic.
But they didn't have pitched instruments then, did they?
Well, there was something. It wasn't absolute pitch like we have 440. It was just like whatever you built the instrument, and it was it was what it was. Yeah.
It's like, everything you just need
You
to
tune to the instrument.
Yeah. And then you like the trope on puer natus.
Natus.
Number 6. You like the alternating performance.
Those are kids, right?
Sounds like it. Yeah.
You said something about a voice choir and then a male choir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say something else to you boys.
Well, yeah, because women were not okay. Yeah, it's very pretty. It's beautiful. Let's just we're going to make sure that we get to it. Readings. Let's talk about the readings, or the reading. It was a single reading today.
I
Questions?
didn't do
Well,
it.
I think
Some of
did you
them,
wanna-
well, no, go, pick up.
Give it to me at the end.
Oh, okay.
What was the reading for today?
37?
Oh, the very long one?
It wasn't that long. 10, 12 pages. Only out of the concise history.
Long question.
Oh, long.
A lot of questions.
There were a lot of questions, yeah, because this is really important because we're getting into
Yeah.
harmony finally. Yes, number 37, Allison.
But were the 4 features counterpoint, harmony, centrality, and notation, and composition, or is it something else?
Those were the 4.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so number 37, where it asks which, this is on page 9, on which 4 features of Western music resulted from the rise of written polyphony in the 11th through 13th centuries. So yeah, the first one was counterpoint. So part versus part. Number 2 is harmony. How to deal with the 2 pitches, and that's of course based on the theories, using perfect intervals and motion and everything, which is counterpoint. 3, the centrality of notation. Because remember what it said, even though, in the Notre Dame school, with organum, that's the first time we have written polyphony, or we're talking about writing polyphony. That's from the Musica Inceriatus treatise of the 9th century, which incidentally you will read this weekend. You will read the Inceriatus treatise. It's online. That's the first time they're mentioning it, but that's only they're mentioning in a theoretical sense of like this is how we can kind of control it, which probably meant it was going on for a couple hundred years before that as a practice, and it was most likely an improvised practice, because when you look at examples of organum, that are written down, it's almost always when you have antiphonal performance between the choir, a soloist, the choir, a soloist, it's always in the solo sections that you have the organum. Not exclusively, but mostly. And so so it probably was an improvised art. Someone who really knew, they knew the chant and they knew how to put the right intervals just kind of by improvisation.
So that's what organum is?
Oh, that's not what organum is polyphonic music, but the reason I'm saying we have the centrality of notation, it was very likely a improvised art at the first time, but in the 9th century it starts being written. And so that's why kind of what we consider Western music today as being something that's primarily a literate or a written tradition. I mean, we think of it all the time, hey, let's do this music. Oh, okay, where's the part? I mean, we just assume, we're not going to say like I'll riff on this and you just kind of come in. Sometimes that happens, but
so jazz, is that different then?
But jazz is based on a literate tradition because it's based on a very distinct set of rules.
But it's not like you're writing every absolute note down.
Exactly, yeah. So there is jazz is much more improvisatory, which is probably like this was. They knew what the rules were, they knew the intervals that they wanted, and you just needed a really skilled person who knew how to do it, not just any member of the choir can come in. And then number 4, which is related to notation, is composition as distinct from performance. Because if it was done improvisatory, composition was performance. You know, like that's how it was done. You performed it, and that's how you composed the extra part. But when you can start writing it down, composition can take place completely separate from performance.
So composition is number 4.
Yeah, composition as distinct from performance.
It's not the same.
Yeah, so composition and performance are now different things. Okay, other questions?
39, I mixed that up with 44, so what's the term organ actually used for?
Well, the way that it's explained in the book, and I really like this, because we've been talking about tropes the last couple of days, right? And tropes is basically adding something. Okay, so we can say that, you know, a trope, that's kind of like the overarching designation of anything that's added, anything that we add. So everything, it's like a Venn diagram, the big circle, you know, everything is inside the circle and then everything else is part of that circle. So there's a trope. A sequence is a kind of a trope because you're adding text. Okay. Okay, you know, just like a music drama. Before, you know, as a trope, it's adding music and text. And organum is a kind of troping too. It's adding music, it's just not adding music in time, it's adding music in space. Meaning vertical aspect, you're adding another part, but it's happening simultaneously. So it's another way of troping a chant. You're just adding a part on top. Okay. So when in question 30,
So not adding music, just adding one.
it is adding music, but it's just adding music at the same time. Instead of adding like a melisma, it's adding another part. So it's a way of troping the chant. It's just another way of troping. It's just in a vertical manner instead of a horizontal manner or with text. So I think if I were to ask that kind of question,
So adding music.
yeah, it's just another way of troping. Jake.
So then that's kind of how we get into 4-part.
This is how we start getting into, what we consider to be modern harmony,
Yeah.
is different kinds of organum.
So that's what the names of the polyphonic composition were, was organum.
That's what they called it, just in general, organum,
And then plain chant was
monophonic.
monophonic. And then but relative to each other, they're parallel fifths. That's the example they gave.
That's one, the very earliest organum, was parallel, parallel motion. But you'll read it in the Musica Inceriatus, because if you do parallel motion at the fourths, you start running into tritones.
Right. So
And so they had these other things of like they start with kind of dissonances and the voices start separating and then they get into fourths, and then that's true organum.
So what do you,
Did you have a question? Okay. Oh, I'll come back to that.
what do you, okay.
Is this just music, or it can be, since we are adding
Mhm.
that
Oh,
way?
can it be
it's
text
just
too?
music?
Now it is, but when we get to the next reading on Monday, we'll talk about motets, which are
Okay, so
trope.
this one is just music.
This is just music
musical
for now.
device. Okay.
But we'll talk about different kinds of troping. The motet is actually troping while having multiple voice parts, like an organum, but also multiple texts at the same time,
Okay.
which is confusing. Allison, I would go back to what you were saying.
So what do you want us to write for 40B then, if it's just
40B.
parallel motion?
40B?
Yes.
What was the position of the two voices relative to it? Oh, it's related to 40A. So which of the two voices? There was the principal voice, or the vox principalis, and the vox originalis. That's what they called the two voices
So
in
not
organum.
function. How do you spell it, sorry?
Oh, principal voice and organal voice. You don't have to use the Latin.
Okay.
So,
Which question is that?
40. Okay, so when you had organum, when you had two parts that were going on, one was called the principal voice, and the other was called the organal voice. The principal voice was the one that held the chant, that held the original plain chant, the liturgical chant. The organal voice was the new part. And at first, the organal voice was always below the principal voice. That's 40B. what was the position of the two voices relative to each other. The principal, the original voice from the plain chant was above, the organal voice, the added voice was below.
So the one